In 1891, workers digging beneath the streets of central London broke through a tunnel wall and found a chamber that had no business existing. Inside, 11 skeletal remains, each one between 7 and 11 feet long. The site was sealed in 36 hours. The workers were paid to disappear. The government office that ordered the shutdown doesn't appear in any public record before or after 1891. I found a reference to what happened in a private surveyor's diary from 1903. And what's in that diary raises a question nobody in official history has been willing to ask. What else is underneath London? And who decided you were never supposed to find out? I wasn't looking for giants when I started this. I was looking into Victorian infrastructure records, the drainage expansion projects that reshaped London in the second half of the 1800s, contracts, foreman reports, construction logs, dry material, administrative history. But then I found a name, Aldous Crane, a foreman, experienced, traceable through a dozen projects across England and Europe. And then, after 1891, completely gone. No employment records, no death record before 1920, no pension, nothing. A man who existed thoroughly on paper until a specific date, then stopped existing on paper entirely. That's not a coincidence. That's a signal. I followed it. This is what I found. The workers were 22 feet below street level, below the medieval layer, below the Roman layer. At that depth, you're not supposed to find anything man-made that isn't ancient rubble. What they found was a chamber, stone-lined walls, a flat ceiling, deliberately constructed. And on the floor, 11 skeletal remains laid out in a rough arrangement, not scattered, not collapsed, placed. The smallest measured 7 feet 4 inches. The largest was estimated above 11 feet. The foreman, Crane, filed a standard incident report. He described the bones as complete, well-preserved, and of a scale inconsistent with any human specimen known to the surveying profession. That report exists. I've seen a transcription of it. What does not exist is any official response to it. No geological inquiry, no academic review, no museum assessment. Just nothing. And then, 36 hours later, armed guards at both ends of the tunnel. But here's what nobody talks about. This wasn't the first time it happened under London. Not even close. 1854. Workers on an early predecessor tunnel to what would become the District Line report breaking into a collapsed underground space. Bones. Large bones. The supervisor orders the chamber backfilled immediately. Internal company record, never made public, located in a privatized archive. 1868, road widening near Aldgate. The East London Observer prints 4 lines. A skeleton of remarkable length discovered during foundation excavation. No follow-up article. The reporter who filed the notice left the paper within the month. No forwarding address recorded. 1891, Aldous Crane and his crew, 11 specimens, site sealed in 36 hours. 3 discoveries, 3 different locations across the city, 3 different decades. All handled the same way, fast, quiet, final. Losing 1 discovery is an accident. Losing 3 across 40 years in the same city with the same speed of response, that's not accident, that's a system. And when I looked at who ordered the 1891 shutdown, what I found was a department that officially does not exist. The shutdown order came from two offices: the Metropolitan Board of Works, standard, traceable, documented, and a second body named in the foreman's report as the Office of Special Surveys. That name appears nowhere in Victorian government directories. No correspondence from it survives in the National Archives. No founding charter, no staff records, no dissolution notice. It issued written instructions, signed them with a departmental seal, arranged payment for the workers, and then ceased to exist in the paperwork entirely. You cannot create a government seal in 1891 without infrastructure, without staff, stationery, authority routed through something real. The Office of Special Surveys was real enough to function. It simply wasn't real enough to leave a trace, which for a government body is almost impossible unless the absence of a trace was the point. But a rushed operation always leaves something behind. Two workers didn't hand everything over. The surveyor's diary is explicit on this point. One worker kept a bone fragment. He described it as coming from the hand, a metacarpal. When the surveyor examined it in 1902, 11 years after the discovery, he recorded its length as approximately 9 inches. A normal human metacarpal, the bone across the back of your hand, is 3 to 4 inches. This one was more than double. The second worker kept something stranger: a flat panel found near one of the skeletons. Not stone, not fabric, rigid, dark. Faintly marked with lines too regular to be natural, too worn to be legible. The surveyor couldn't identify the material or the manufacturing method. In 1902, that was not a minor admission. Victorian engineers classified materials for a living. If he couldn't identify it, it wasn't anything in standard use. Both objects passed into the surveyor's estate after his death in 1911, dispersed at auction, untraceable since. So where did the 11 skeletons actually go? A night watchman saw exactly where. 3 days after the site was sealed, a covered cart, unmarked, 2 horses, was seen leaving the excavation site. The night watchman at an adjacent property noted it in his logbook, not because he thought it was significant, just because it was 2 in the morning and movement at that hour was worth recording. That logbook survives. Private collection, Edinburgh. I've seen the transcription. The cart went east. East of that location in 1891, 2 institutions: the Royal College of Surgeons, which maintained specimen collections, and a British Museum overflow warehouse in Whitechapel. That warehouse was demolished in 1934. No public inventory of its contents was ever produced. A warehouse full of British Museum overflow material, demolished without a catalog. You don't skip the catalog by accident. Cataloging is the entire point of a museum storage facility. The absence of one isn't administrative laziness, it's a choice. If you've made it this far, you already see it. The pattern is too consistent, the timing too precise. Stay with me, because what I've found across the rest of Europe makes the London case look like the smallest piece of something much larger. Paris, 1880. Workers deepening a section of the catacombs report breaking into a pre-existing lower chamber. The municipal engineer's report for that project survives, except for pages 14 through 19, which are missing from the bound document, while all surrounding pages are intact. Pages don't fall out of a bound government report uniformly. they get removed. Berlin, 1887. A newspaper reports bones of prodigious size found during railway foundation work. The article runs once, no follow-up. The excavation company's records from that year are listed in the Berlin State Archive as lost during reorganization. St. Petersburg, 1893. The Imperial Technical Society's journal publishes a brief note, anomalous human remains recovered during canal dredging, and references a full report as forthcoming. That report never appears. The journal never addresses the omission. London, Paris, Berlin, St. Petersburg. 4 cities, 4 countries, a 13-year window. Same discovery profile, same silence profile, same speed of institutional response. This coordination required communication across borders, which means somebody knew, across multiple governments, simultaneously. Here's the part that doesn't require missing documents to verify, because it's still standing. You can measure it yourself. Victorian London built aggressively between 1850 and 1900. Government buildings, administrative offices, courthouses, municipal chambers. Scattered across those structures are proportions that don't make functional sense. Interior corridors, not entrance halls, not ceremonial spaces, with ceiling heights of 14 and 15 feet. Working hallways where grandeur serves no purpose. Staircases with risers so deep that a person of average height must stretch noticeably to climb them at a comfortable pace. Basement rooms beneath government buildings dating to the early 1700s, with door frames clearing 12 feet where nothing of value needed impressing. The explanation: Victorian aesthetic excess, a love of grandeur. Applied apparently to back corridors and storage cellars where no member of the public would ever stand. Grandeur for its own sake, in spaces where nobody important would ever see it. That explanation has never made sense. But if the people using those spaces weren't average-sized, it makes perfect sense. And the architecture isn't the only physical record that survived. The tools did too. Demolition sites across London in the late 19th and early 20th century produced something that keeps appearing in estate records and auction catalogs: oversized tools. Wrenches measuring 4 and 5 feet in length. Not decorative, functional, with wear patterns, grip erosion, the physical evidence of actual repeated use by actual hands. Hands much larger than ours. Auction catalogs list them as antique industrial curiosities. Museum records categorize them as heavy machinery components. Neither explanation addresses the obvious question: what industrial process in 1880s London required a wrench that weighs over 150 pounds and needs hands the size of dinner plates to grip it? There's no documented manufacturing context for these tools, no factory output records, no purchase orders. They simply exist in quantity across estate sales and barn clearances, as if they were ordinary objects belonging to ordinary people who were simply not ordinary in size. Once you see the tools, you can't look at the buildings the same way. And once you look at the buildings differently, everything below street level starts asking a different question. Government survey maps of London from the 1750s, a century before the Victorian excavations began, contain a notation that appears in no official legend or key. A small symbol, placed at intervals along certain streets near the Thames. An archivist who studied them in the 1960s described it as resembling a door with a bar across it. Sealed, pre-marked, before the digging. Which means someone in the 1750s already knew what was below certain locations in London. They marked the maps. They didn't dig. They didn't publish. They simply left a symbol that would only mean something to someone who already knew. Those marked locations correspond with uncomfortable regularity to the excavation sites where anomalous finds were reported in the 1800s. Not all of them, but enough. Enough that the overlap is not coincidental. Someone marked the locations of what was beneath London decades before the Victorians broke into the first chamber. And nobody officially acknowledged that map notation then. Nobody officially acknowledges it now. Pre-marked locations, coordinated cross-border suppression, a government department that doesn't exist. This is no longer about one chamber in 1891. Think about what this actually requires. For the 1891 response to work the way it did, 36 hours from discovery to sealed site, an unnamed government office issuing binding instructions, 3 months' wages produced and distributed overnight, a cart dispatched at 2 in the morning, you need an existing protocol. You don't build that protocol in 36 hours. You build it in advance. You build it because you expect to need it. The Office of Special Surveys wasn't created in response to Aldous Crane's report. It existed before that Tuesday morning. It was waiting. Which means someone in the British government in 1891 or earlier had already decided that this type of discovery would happen, had already decided how it would be handled, and had already built the machinery to handle it quietly. The 1750s maps told them where to watch. The office told them what to do when something was found, and across Europe equivalent machinery was in place, because the Paris pages, the Berlin records, the St. Petersburg omission all happened with the same speed and the same institutional silence. This wasn't a local decision by a nervous foreman or an embarrassed city official. This was coordinated at a level that crossed national boundaries, in a period when international communication was slow and expensive. The speed and consistency of the suppression implies prior agreement, an agreement made well before any of these discoveries took place, an agreement that something beneath the old cities of Europe needed to stay beneath them. The question isn't whether someone decided to hide this. The evidence is past that point. The question, the only question that remains, is what they were so certain would be found that they built the system before anyone found it. And the answer to that question is still underneath London, marked on an 18th century map that nobody has officially explained. Here is what the record actually shows. 3 discoveries in London across 40 years, 1854, 1868, 1891, each handled with the same silence, the same speed, the same result. A foreman who filed an honest report and then ceased to exist on paper. A government office that issued real orders and left no trace. Physical evidence retained by workers, a hand bone twice the normal size, an unidentifiable material panel, documented in 1902 and gone by 1912. 11 skeletons transported east in an unmarked cart to a warehouse demolished without a catalog in 1934. Parallel suppressions in Paris, Berlin, and St. Petersburg within the same 15-year window. Oversized architecture in working spaces where there was no reason for grandeur. oversized tools with wear patterns proving actual use, 18th century maps pre-marking locations that would produce anomalous finds 100 years later. Every one of these elements, taken alone, is dismissible. Together, they are a system. A system designed to ensure that something found beneath London streets in 1891 would never accumulate into a record large enough to demand explanation. It almost worked. Almost. The buildings are still there. The maps are still there. The surveyor's diary is still there. The night watchman's logbook is still there. They preserved what the official record tried to erase. Not completely, but enough. If you want to go deeper, the next video covers the Paris catacombs incident and the 14 missing pages. The evidence there is harder to explain away than anything in London. If this raised questions you haven't been able to shake, you know what to do.